So we can always twist the words off the grid or on the grid, because a lot of people on the grid also are off the grid many a time because of unreliability. So if a country like India itself today, this is the last statistic. I've requested all of my panelists that we will not have any much jargon on statistics or buzzwords. So with those challenges that we have 300 million people without absolute electricity, another 300 million who are suffering from unreliability. There are issues of livelihoods and poverty that are connected to energy, and more than 1.6 billion people. And when I entered this field in 1994, the number was same. And have we done, as humanity, have we done anything much in terms of energy? Are we looking at a very non-inclusive world? Is it a question of not having energy and nearly an issue of human rights in many ways? And when people talk of on the grid or off the grid, for example, when there are people who have electricity, and when a lady dies because of maternal death in an hospital which didn't have electricity, does it mean that she was off the grid or she was on the grid? I think we need to look at electricity, energy access in a very holistic manner, and how do we develop the ecosystem for the access to actually work is what we're going to discuss today. Just to give an example that, as we say, the biggest subsidy that Google got is the internet. Google would not have succeeded if internet was not there. Who builds that ecosystem for energy access or energy delivery to succeed? And what are those challenges? What are those opportunities? So I've requested my esteemed panel members who said, I'm not going to go into introductions. You can actually go to the web and see who they are and what they do. Let's get to the meat of what we are all talking about today is about energy and how do you get energy access in an equitable fashion, in an inclusive manner across the world. So each one of them will present 4 to 5 minutes of what they have been doing over the last X number of years. And then I will moderate some of the questions to get some perspective from their stand and then open up to the audience. So we have approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes for the show. So I'll start with Piyush, and Piyush, off you go.
Thank you, Harish. This is Piyush Mathur. I run an energy access business called Simpa Networks. At Simpa Networks, we package solar home systems for homes, shops, and SMEs in rural India with point-of-sale financing and doorstep service to systematically break the barriers to adoption and create a scalable model which can then ultimately reach all those who remain underserved. I emphasize that we're building a scalable model, not meaning to solve the problem all by ourselves, but that's where we have invested our energies over the last couple of years in perfecting all those various elements of the business model, which could ultimately make a solution very scalable. There are barriers to energy access. Harish has alluded to some of them in his opening commentary. In our experience, the biggest barriers are awareness. Awareness of what energy can do for me. There is, like it or not, there is a segment of population out there which is totally disaffected, which has slept their lives under a tree, and it's hard to argue with them why is a fan better than sleeping under a tree. So there are those people who still exist. There are, again, a variety of energy situations. There are others who are partially served through the grid, but not habituated enough yet to rely on energy like all of us do. There are others who are getting increasingly habituated, but are remaining underserved. So their needs are high, but affordabilities are stretched. And we have to address a variety of these energy situations when we talk about solving the problem of energy access. So what we have been doing is focusing on some of these issues. How do we break down these barriers of awareness? We'll create a direct sales and service channel which is able to counsel customers, but then create a last mile distribution network which can scale, because last mile is expensive. Us trying to build awareness for an entire country is also expensive. So how can we create a self-perpetuating model is what we have focused on. The other big barrier is financing. Again, Harish alluded to it, but the problem of access to energy, it's our insight, is intricately linked with the problem of access to finance. If they had money, solutions in the form of distributed renewable energy already exist to solve that problem. If they had electricity, they would have created enough opportunities for themselves up until now to actually come out of poverty. So the two need to be addressed and solved together. And to be able to do that, you have to build financial models, economic business models, which are financeable, which are self-sustainable, which can be seen by mainstream commercial lenders as worthy of long-term finance. So there again, we have innovated and created models which have successfully resulted in us now being able to mobilize domestic commercial capital within India from stodgy mainstream commercial banks, which has remained a challenge in the sector. So this is a bit of an introduction of who we are. I haven't described to you the business because I imagine that all of you who are here understand the basic business models in the space. But we believe in providing meaningful amounts of electricity to our customers, which in our definition is at least a base load of 3 to 4 energy efficient light fittings, a fan, in many cases even a television now, but in all cases mobile charging ports. So our systems are of a typical capacity between 100 to 200 watts, and we provide them on easy payment plans packaged with financing such that our customers can get to ownership over a period of 1 to 3 years. We then also take responsibility for after-sale service because our customers are frankly not familiar with solar technology as much as we are. I'll stop here, but we'll discuss more.
I'm Ravi Kailas. I'm with Mitra Energy. We are a utility-scale renewables business, and we started in 2010. And the idea then was, can you create a startup utility? And I know the conception always was a startup meant you need a technology business or you have some unique idea. But the idea that we were trying to build on was, can you create utility scale renewables in a country where in 2010, today of course the environment is very different, where renewables was an afterthought, or it was largely built as a tax accelerated depreciation scheme where almost 10 or 12 gigawatts of wind energy had come up. We said, can we make this into a commercially viable business on scale? So over the last 7 years, we have executed across India. We have about 2 gigawatts of wind and solar either completed or under execution. We have about 1.3 gigawatts of wind now and another 500 megawatts of utility scale solar under execution. One of the differentiation we made in our model was that almost all large renewable players across the world, their model has been access to capital and a yield on what is the capital they're investing. So renewables has largely been driven by pension funds or private equity funds, or driven also by social needs. So in Europe, for example, in the US, where they were replacing existing forms of power with more socially conscious or more socially responsive forms of power. But in India, the opportunity, or in many other countries, the opportunity is if you're building power from scratch, or you're not replacing, but you're adding into the grid, what are the different challenges and how do you approach an economy like that? And one of the differentiation that we came up with was, if you're competing with, or if you're in an environment where almost all your peers have access to large amounts of capital, or at finely differentiated pricing, how can we compete in that space? So our model has 3 or 4 elements. The first is that we are sort of an end-to-end player, right from determining where to set up our wind farms. We set up wind masts to determine wind data over long periods of time. We actually develop our own projects, which means that we get permissions from governments. We build transmission networks to go to local substations. We also do the EPC, the engineering and commissioning and construction of these projects by ourselves. And then we also do the asset management part of the business once these have been built. So we have been able to create a business that instead of simply owning a farm and selling power, so we are in almost all parts of that business. And I think that as you're trying to build in scale, we needed this level of understanding of building all of these. And the other thing is said that if you're going to be in utility scale and if you're going to build a percentage, build towards being a percentage of the total pie, it's much harder to say, I found this spot on the hill that's the best wind in the country. At the end of the day, you'll be pretty much the average in that area. So we said that we need to build almost across India. So even our first 500 megawatts of wind, instead of having it in 1 or 2 locations, we ended up building it in 6 different states, in 10 different projects. So we were able to understand what are the execution challenges in Rajasthan or Gujarat or Tamil Nadu, or different states have very, very different challenges. And of course, some of our innovation has also been in how we've been able to finance these projects and how we've been able to create a competitive rate of return on these projects. So that's a little bit about Mithra.
Thank you for having me. We are a consulting firm, so a bit different from the other speakers. And you can see an infographic we put for you. So we are dealing a lot with energy companies, energy investors, investment banks. And what we do for our clients is that we try to put the whole picture in front of them in a crunched 1-page, 2-page to help them to strategize. And for what I thought would be interesting for this session is to look into Prime Minister Modi's energy policy and how that could create opportunities for entrepreneurs or investors. Here I'm not going to say that this is going to succeed or not succeed, so we are not talking about that, but just to introduce more into the eyes and then from the eyes of an investors to see what are the opportunities that this policy could create or potentially could create. Starting with energy security for India, for any country that is importing massive amount of energy like India, of course having a reliable source and diversification is very, very important issue. The other thing that is important for India is not only to have a reliable source of energy to feed and fuel its economy that is rapidly growing, is to providing energy for that 300 million people that you mentioned, but also to reduce pollution. So coming to Mr. Modi's plan, he also spoke about it yesterday in an inauguration of this conference. He introduced the Subhagaya plan that by December of 2018, based on his plan, he's targeting to electrify all of India, includes providing free energy to poor people. So here, just to look at that, how that could change the, first of all, the fundamentals. If this plan is implemented, we are expecting that within 2 years, the energy demand in India is going to, the electricity, especially demand, is going to rise 20 to 35%. But also the cost, so feeding and giving access to poor, access of energy to poor people for free is going to cost the government of India about $2.5 billion. The other issue is the challenges that the whole grid system in India has, from lack of capacity to infrastructure. There is electricity loss in the grid, but also there is electricity theft. So these are all the challenges to be faced in the whole grid system. Issue and that Mr. Modi is targeting is his renewable energy target by 2022. By 2022, he's trying to, or he's planning to build 175 gigawatt of renewable energy capacity, which out of these, majority of that is solar, which sounds very practical for India, but also for India that coal is a major source that is local, and it's India, the land hosts coal. India doesn't have oil, adequate sources of oil or gas. So solar would be the second in-home source that could increase the level of energy security for India. And out of these 175 gigawatt, 100 of that is solar, and out of that $160 billion of targeted investment in increasing the capacity of renewable energy, $100 billion of that is for solar energy. A major challenge for India electricity and power sector to substitute coal for renewable, especially solar, is that solar is 50% more expensive than coal when it's used for thermal. So for you entrepreneurs in energy, any ideas that could, or any investment that could reduce this cost would be, of course, very important. The increase of efficiency, reduction of the prices of the solar panels, these are all very important. And also to look into the energy mix in India, that about 60% of electricity today is produced from coal. So how these numbers are going to change in the within the next 2 years and by 22. So these are all the very big challenges that the government of India is going to face. But on the investment side and opportunity side, of course, create a lot of opportunities for investing in solar energy, for reducing pollution from coal. There are entrepreneurs here. Actually, we had a discussion last night. There is a company that based in California. They have a technology to reduce the pollution from coal, and they're very interested in investing in India. They take oil from coal, they take the water, and so these are all very interesting opportunities that, based on the overall energy policy under the current administration in India, could be created for the entrepreneurs and investors.
Hello. Yeah, thanks, Sarah, for setting that context. So let me ask Piyush. We've been successively looking at governments who have promised electricity over the years. I mean, our whole lifetimes. Is it practical? What Sarah said?
I think to practically solve the problem, we first have to practically understand the problem. And I don't think there is a rich enough understanding of the problem amongst policymakers at this point in time. The whole narrative and the dialogue is still very binary, whether a house is on the grid or not on the grid. The energy problem is actually much more complex than that. There are attributes of energy. There is quality of service, there is continuity of service, there is a reliability of service, which attributes are never really spoken about. I mean, imagine electricity quality index similar to air quality index. You would measure electricity on multiple parameters, and that will actually expose that even where we are supposedly grid connected, even the cities in India are not actually getting 24 hours of electricity. There is a deficit. That deficit on average might still only be half an hour or 1 hour every day, but that is still 3%. So if in urban India we are running a 3%, 4% deficit, then we can't quite completely solve the problem in rural India where the challenges are much more extreme. So to answer your question more sharply, I think the intent of the government is right and ought to be respected, but that intent, as we know, of policymakers is influenced by political considerations, which in turn are driven by votes, and sometimes the narrative gets ahead of the reality on the ground. And that's what we have seen successively over the years. That doesn't mean that the improvement hasn't happened. Improvement has definitely happened, but not at the rate and scale at which we could be confident at this very point in time that the problem of access to energy will be conclusively solved by 2018, even if Mr. Modi's targets are achieved. So it's not actually about meeting Mr. Modi's targets. It's going beyond that.
The opportunity, but again, we are not judging. I said I'm not discussing today that if either this is doable or.
Sure. No, thanks. I mean, in a sense, where on exactly. I mean, I'm glad I'm a moderator, so I can ask the questions, and I'm not in an answering position. Okay, so let me finish with them, and I'm sure, and more controversial the better. So, because it's a problem we need to solve, and we cannot be diplomatic anymore. There are multiple poor people suffering from lack of energy, and then we need to all take our responsibility and solve it. And I think that's where we cannot be hiding behind. I'm glad let's get this out in the open, and this is the issue. So, Ravi, from your own experience. I was asked in '94 when I started Selco. In '94, I was asked, what happens to your business if grid comes in? Today, the younger entrepreneurs are asked the same question in 22 years. But from what can we learn from your own experience that in the large scale, that you have had so much of experience, how do we actually make it happen today for the rest 300 million, one, and for the unreliability? Because if you look at the blackouts, and Piyush would say, Piyush's business or any other businesses who are in the off-grid sector today, many of the clients who have bought solar from them are people who are already on the grid. So we are not even talking of people off the grid, but on the grid. What lessons can we learn from what you have done over the years?
I think I'll be a bit more optimistic on this one. Before I answer that question, I just wanted to add something to what Sarah said. I think you suggested that solar is actually more expensive than thermal, but actually in India the marginal cost of setting up thermal is about 5 rupees a unit, and solar is somewhere between 2 rupees 50 paise and 3 rupees 50 paise now. So it's actually today. So that's when we're saying this 200. If you're taking 200 gigawatts of solar versus 200 gigawatts of thermal, solar is actually economically easier. So to pull back, I think one of the biggest changes that has happened is this price differential. Most countries, even if you take the UK or Germany or the US, in the last 10 or 15 years or 20 years, the push was based on social policy, from people saying, look, we don't want coal power, or we don't want something that is damaging the environment. But in countries like India, while politicians still want, or people still want clean air, etc., the push has come from saying that, look, we have 300 gigawatts of total generating capacity today. We need 2,000. So we have less than 10% of what we actually need today. So where is the rest of the 1,800 going to come from? And if we're saying we want to add 200 gigawatts of renewable in it, I believe that it is going to happen. In fact, if anything, the issue will be whether it will happen in 5 years or 7 years or 9 years. It's not the question if it's going to happen or not, because it's a commercial proposition. And while there is a lot of discussion in the last couple of years about the government's stated intent of saying that we want to do this much or we want to do that much, remember that from 2010 till 2014 or so, before the new policy, 2015 when these policies came about, there was virtually no policy. And every state had its own policy, and typically the policy was to ensure that the renewables got about 25 paise less than thermal. So, I mean, in the last 25 years in India, renewables has always been somewhere cheaper than coal in one way or the other. I think that just as, for example, if you take a different sector, like let's say the telecom sector, I don't think anybody believed that we would have 1 billion mobile phones and that the largest number of these customers would actually be rural. And it was not through government policies that these happened. It was because there were some incentives to go out there, but it largely came from demand. And I would say that the demand is there today, and it is cost competitive to deliver. Having said that, there are challenges in how to reach it. And if we are talking of microgrids in this panel, there are 3 broad challenges. One is that power everywhere in the world is sold through a cross-subsidy model. So it's a commodity. The same unit of power, if it is sold to commercial, it is a particular price. If it is sold to industrial, it's a certain price, residential or agricultural. So what happens is when you start building these microgrids or you start putting rooftop solar there, you are taking away this whole superstructure falls down for DISCOMs. So for the distribution companies, which means that you're taking away some of their larger customers, the people who can actually afford to set up some of these things. And also, when you have this cross-subsidy model that is being threatened. So you find the local regulator saying, no, I don't want this to happen. So that's the tension there between what is national policy versus what's happening on the ground. The second is financing, which is this is a larger issue there. Because if you're setting up these grids in this village or in this town or attached to this municipality, as the price is falling every year and every 2 years, so you purchase these assets, you put them up there, and you sign a contract with either the local municipality or with the local cooperative of apartments who are there, or to individual households. And 3 years later, somebody else comes along and says, hey, you know what, the price is actually half of that now. More worryingly is what happens when the government grid comes there and says that, yes, this village, you guys have set up this microgrid, wonderful, and you had this agreement that you're supposed to sell power for the next 10 years at this price, but we've brought this grid along there. So that has what is going to be the exit mechanism when that comes? So that's a huge challenge there. The other is like mobile phone. I mean, if you take it out there, you're handing it somebody, you can virtually give it away, or you can give it for 1,000 rupees, 2,000 rupees. This is a lot more expensive equipment. So it's not worthwhile. It's not the capability for the user to purchase capital equipment to generate power does not make sense. But if you own it, and if you're giving him or if you're giving that household the ability to buy and over a period of time to own it, and if that period in this requires somewhere between 9, 10, 12 years, if you're getting return on capital assets of that size. So where is the security in that? And I mean, and you're also leaving it on somebody else's rooftop. How do you get access to that? What happens if he decides, I don't want to do this anymore, I don't like yours anymore? You can't take that asset really and put it somewhere else. There's some of these issues. And all of these have resolution. I mean, all of these have ways in which they can be resolved. And I think that as the Indian government has set a goal of almost 40 gigawatts of rooftop itself, or basically this microgrid, or going to individual customers. So I think that unless you resolve some of these issues, we are not going to get much further ahead. But once they are resolved, just as we see, I mean, in 2010 when we started, the total industry size of additions in the industry was about 2 gigawatts a year. Today we're expecting 20 gigawatts a year or 15 gigawatts a year. So that's a very positive sign that the industry size has grown by 10x in 5-6 years.
No, thanks, Ravi, for putting that perspective, because definitely this government is somebody who has also put renewable energy at the forefront, and which was not there. Also, I mean, the thing is, you talked about rooftops, and all three of you have talked about rooftops and our policy getting stronger in this country. But the point is, rooftops, and we're saying the US has a certain model of rooftops, where many of the states have incentives. Germany has a certain, but the difference between India, US, and Germany is that people in the United States and Germany work in cities and live in the suburbs. There is a building codes in the suburbs. Here people work in the cities and live in the cities, right? Me sometimes putting a rooftop in my roof, I have no idea if the next guy is going to sell his land, make a multi-story building, and a shadow falls on my roof. We are vertical. We are vertical cities. We are vertical. We are not suburban. And so the rooftop, second point is, when we talk about feed-in tariff, with our transmission and distribution losses at approximately 25 to 30%, should we not be incentivizing people for owning solar in your own house, and I'm going to incentivize how much you're not going to buy from me, rather than incentivizing me from how much you're going to sell to me? I think because again you're selling it to me, again I'm losing 25, 30%. Should we not culturally, socially, at a country aspect, change the way we look at feed-in tariffs in this country?
You're absolutely right. So that's where this cross-subsidy things comes in when we talk of net metering. So where let's say you're buying power on a residential unit at, let's say, 4 rupees. And you expect that when you want to sell your surplus power to the grid, it should still be 4 rupees. But that's not what the wholesale cost of power is for the grid. So the grid loses money on the net metering unless it is managed well. So that's one. The second issue you're saying about the difference between Germany or America and India is that in all of those countries, there are giant subsidies being given. I mean, we are talking of many commercial companies in the US, without naming names, who are large, who are multi-billion size companies. Tell me which of them have made money yet. So in India, the only business model that's going to work is that each of these have to be commercially viable. Unless either the prices come down or a model is in place that allows for it, irrespective of what happens, you're not going to see large-scale deployment. I mean, large-scale deployment is happening in solar in India today because we compete very effectively against thermal. Does that answer the question?
No, absolutely. Thanks, Ravi. And I'll come back to you, Piyush.
Just I wanted to
please.
check one thing, just the information, the data that we put together because we didn't want to. It shows
Yeah.
on, I said we don't want to judge at this session that if this is doable or not. So we just use the Indian government's data and the data on the price of the coal versus solar thermal is Central Electricity Authority of India. So they might just looking into the government grid. I mean, you just talked about the prices are cheaper, but
Yeah, I mean, please, Ravi.
No, I mean, we
nothing for us to. So
I mean,
let
it's
you know.
there in the, I mean, almost all these bids are transparent. They are on websites. You can go and see that the last bids for solar in the last 6 months have been somewhere in the range of 5 rupees to 2 rupees 50 paise, and all the auctions for coal plants are also online, and we can see that they're somewhere in the 5 rupees. And that is, and the 5 rupees for coal also means that over the next 25 years, if the coal price increases, that gets passed on to the customer too. And a solar or a wind PPA for the next 25 years, it's set at the same price as a generator.
Thanks, Ravi. I'll a little bit digress now, coming at Piyush. And a question that we were discussing before was the type of model that you have been pushing, the prepaid model of electricity. Tanzania and Kenya, two small countries, and as small as some of our states. 3 companies have been able to raise $200 million in the last 3 years, right? $200 million in the off-grid sector to provide solar to very poor households between what? 8 watt to 20 watt, not even more than that. And the question that we were asking, why hasn't $200 million is a huge amount. I don't think so in India, in the off-grid area, for people doing decentralized, we would have crossed $20 million in the best case scenario in a country like India. Why do you think that they have been able to raise 200 million and we not even 10?
Okay, so one big difference between Tanzania, Kenya, and India is that in Tanzania and Kenya, 75% of the homes and people are actually off-grid. So it is to be expected, and those countries are actually setting an example for us to follow, that if you are thinking in a progressive way, looking at the future of how energy adoption is going to play out, you would actually take advantage of decentralized generation technologies. I mean, look at what happened in the transport sector. At one time, we all used to use public transport, but then the technology evolved, and then we had engines which could be fitted into a motor car. Even that didn't work, but in 1919, Model T started selling because you attached consumer financing to it. That engine got further evolved into a 2-stroke engine which could now be fitted into a bike. So we are able to now flexibly commute and flexibly transport ourselves using individual devices. The same pattern is playing out in the energy ecosystem as well. The energy generation, which historically has been centralized, is now getting increasingly decentralized, not quite personalized yet, but getting there. So let's take advantage of that technology. Let's start putting in more investment into decentralized technologies which can leapfrog traditional technologies and reach those homes fast enough. That recognition is well entrenched in countries where 75% of the populations are off-grid, because it's easy for them to come to terms with this. In India, we have a psychological barrier because, yes, we have made progress and 75% of the country is actually on the grid. So you then have that urge and that temptation that, okay, why can't we just go from 75% to 100%? But what you forget, and I come back to examples from Germany, US, and also Tokyo, because you specifically mentioned vertical cities. Tokyo is a vertical city, and Tokyo Electric, by the way, which is a utility of, in Tokyo, the electric utility, has lost 2 million customers over the last 1 year. They are reconsidering their strategy and are actually thinking actively about going the decentralized route. Now, why are traditional energy companies thinking that, because they're looking at what's happening in the space, how the energy is going to be bought and sold in the future and consumed in the future, and that's driving their decisions today. So again, coming back to your basic question, the key difference in Africa and India is that Africa is more off-grid, and therefore it's been easy for them to come to a sensible commercial decision, which is possible today, that okay, let's start prioritizing decentralized renewable energy. Here we do not have that understanding and recognition just yet.
Can I answer that in another way? The reason I think that we're not seeing a lot more investment in microgrid is because the investments in the utility scale is so enormous right now. This is low-hanging fruit. You don't find these types of investment in utility scale in many of the countries in Africa. It's not going to detail there. But today, the ability to invest in hundreds of billions is in building utility scale. So only after some of those have been to build a 10 kilowatt plant, 100 kilowatt plant, 1 megawatt plant, or 200 megawatt plant. That's almost the same amount of effort, energy, going around, finding land, getting permissions, etc. So, but as you said, only 20 million may have come in off-grid in India, but 200 billion is expected to come. Most of the other countries, I mean, India is going to be one of the largest investment destinations for renewables. It already, you can see that happening already.
Sure, yeah, I mean, it's renewables, yeah, so I mean, to also give a context to people is, from our perspective is, while you said Tokyo companies losing customers, here by not providing electricity, we are actually losing generations, right? I mean, we need to look at little differently. But Piyush, if you can also, what Ravi mentioned about the threat of decentralized energy, whether it's individual home lighting systems or microgrids, or whatever model that we do of supply chain, people, I mean, there are a lot of young entrepreneurs and policymakers here in this. Always the question is that grid is going to come and what's going to happen. You've been running a business in UP, in Uttar Pradesh, where people say, oh, it's not going to work, but you've done. Do you think that's a threat?
90% of our customers are already on the grid.
Why are they taking so?
We are building a business on the basis that they are still underserved. And why are they underserved? They're underserved because the grid is unreliable, the grid is poor quality, the grid doesn't give them the base load that they expect. So what is the grid there for if it can't even provide the base load?
And according to what Ravi's statistics is, even if the grid becomes reliable, your systems will always be cheaper.
Yes. No, I'm making a slightly different point. It is that if you're building I mean, one is to sell or to create an individual customer-owned thing. But when we say microgrid, we're talking, let's say, for a village or a cluster of people, where we say we'll build a solar project there for 1 megawatt or so and supply these 500 houses. So those are the kind of projects I'm talking about. I'm not talking about individual devices in people's homes.
See, Ravi, the issue a lot of times, if you look at, there was a debate earlier that we have, in India, we have a surplus of electricity, right? Today, surplus of electricity. That's because the distribution companies are not buying it. Because the more they distribute, more losses they'll get into, right? So the business model today, or in terms of decentralized energy, in many ways, what we have seen in India is a lot of people who bought solar and are poor are actually paying to the banks. Same people who actually don't pay to the utility. So there is a sense of ownership that comes in. So do you mean to say that India is kind of the right model to look at decentralized energy, and this lots of infrastructure actually does not make sense?
No, the difference is if you're providing a light or if you're providing a fan, etc. But if you're trying to run a washing machine, or if you're trying to run anything that requires more energy, we're talking of a different level of capital investment there. I mean, we're saying that, I mean, as soon as people get the first bid, just as Piyush said, I mean, as soon as you get one, you want the second round. But for that, you need a completely different type of generating. That's the level what I'm talking about. I mean, if you're saying that a household in Hyderabad or in Chennai of 5 people have this much requirement or power requirement, if you're trying to replicate that in the microgrid, those are the issues. Those are the issues that come up at that time. Those require significantly more financing than what an individual household can bear or should be allowed to bear. Why should an individual household be required to bear the capital cost of generating power himself?
Good. And Sarah, you.
Well, I know that I'm not supposed to ask question, but I would like to question your question because you mentioned a few times that what will happen to the off businesses that are into solar and off the grid if the electricity, the undergrid expands. But I don't see these things necessary to be separate. And I mean, again, just to emphasize on what the other panelists said, that people can be still undergrid and use yes, exactly. So that's very important, and that's how in U.S. happens. Is many houses that they have rooftop solar panels, they are not off the grid, or they don't cut their connection with the grid. And in India is the same. I traveled a lot around the country, and in Chennai there are many houses, many hotels that they have rooftop solar panel, but they're still connected. They might save. I mean, I remember myself telling us that at night you're not going to take a warm hot water shower, it doesn't run, but they're still connected. So I don't see that as a threat for the investors in solar or
Sarah, there's a difference of people who are not on the grid, have solar, and the grid comes in, is a difference to people who have grid and then buy solar.
yeah.
There's a different mind
Exactly.
perception, yeah. So what happens is, in a lot of cases, the people stop paying for the bank until they realize that the grid is unreliable, so I start paying back to the bank, right? So this is the social, the willingness to pay and the social business models that actually, in terms of the social dynamics of communities that needs
So
to
now
be.
I have a question.
Sure.
Just here, even not putting people on the grid. When Mr. Modi announced this plan that is going to give free energy, electricity to poor, what happens to the off-the-grid businesses? Even before because they're not supposed to pay anything to the government, then are they still willing to pay the bank? So that's
See, I have the free, whenever the government announces free, it does not happen.
It's one light bulb free.
And-
It's
and-
not
and
all your power
There's
free.
a large scheme called Bhagya Jyoti scheme. A Bhagya Jyoti scheme is people who earn less than
no. I'm just
40.
talking about
No,
mindset.
wait, I
because
tell you.
said mindset.
No, there's
I'm not saying
there's
their
already a
willingness.
Bhagya Jyoti scheme for last 50 years. People
Yeah.
who earn less than 18,000 rupees get free electricity already, but still have got for solar and paid for the bank.
And still we have electricity theft. I
See,
mean,
electricity theft is a different ballgame. It's a different animal. As a gorilla, it's lot. And if you
don't
look at
want to touch it.
yeah, no, because if you look at the percentage of people who actually do electricity theft, it's a larger institution. It's not the poorer people. So if you look
Typically
at
for
it,
agriculture
yes,
or
and agriculture and large institutions.
or
Anyway,
Yeah,
but
that's
Piyush, when in the sense that today, when you look at people who have, I'll come to you after this. So, prepaid technology, okay, caught up in Africa very well. India failed in many parts, right? Has failed in terms of experimentation. Prepaid has failed. There are multiple reasons. What do you think?
I'm not sure if I will agree with your assertion that it has failed. I think the prepaid has no magic in it. I mean, I used to live in UK for 15 years. Prepaid meters exist even in UK, which is fully electrified. So it's not about prepaid or whether it's not prepaid. It's about the quality of service that you're providing and the social dynamics that you spoke about earlier. At what exactly is the proposition you're offering to customers? If it's prepaid for usage, then that's a utility model, and I have a choice of not using it for some times in between and then using it for other times, which then elongates the payback periods for the developers, which I think is a problem because our financial industry isn't mature enough to deal with that type of uncertainty. But if it's prepaid, leading to a certain ownership, prepaid technology, which remotely can disable the system as a great enablement and great enforcement tool, but you're still expected to pay, which is what happens in a postpaid mobile phone, which can also be turned off, then I think it's a different dynamic. I mean, there is evidence from microfinance companies that when people buy stuff and they take microloans for that, they pay 99% of the times. So if we are delivering value to them, then why would they not pay for this service too? And this is essential.
No, thanks, Piyush. I mean, if I follow the Indian, somebody's having fun. In Manipur,
I think
in
someone won.
in Manipur, which is one of the northeastern states,
Yes.
no, so in Manipur, which actually the state utility bought in prepaid for paying electricity bills. As soon as they brought in the prepaid, solar market went up. Because people started realizing that if I save on electricity, can I pay that much for actually owning a solar? In fact, prepaid in the utility sector led to increase of renewables in many ways. That actually shows that people found out that renewables was much cheaper than owning it many ways. Ma'am, you've been asking. Oh, after, please, absolutely.
I'll be in state also.
Yeah, so I'm Kelly. I'm working for the company 3E. That's actually a Belgian company, but we're in Hyderabad now since the last year, and we're in renewable energy consultancy and software, and we have 16 gigawatts connected solar and wind parks already, and we see a huge opportunity here in India as well. And there were just a few points that I wanted to come to. So yes, indeed, on the numbers, the PPAs on solar are so low that actually right now in India, solar is cheaper than coal. So that was my initial reaction on the numbers. But then also about the awareness. So I fully agree that awareness is really essential to make solar happen. And for example, I'm from Belgium, and it's true, in Belgium, in Germany, you know, there were huge subsidies to put solar rooftops on the houses. But in the end, those subsidies helped to create awareness. Because, okay, everything was subsidized, and everybody was investing in solar panels on their roofs, and now everybody has it, and the prices went down, but everybody still wants it. And it's actually now even part of the building policy that if you build a new house, you have to reach a certain efficiency level of your house, and that means that you have to integrate solar energy in your house. So you can say that actually giving those subsidies was a way to create awareness. And that awareness now, I think, is there in Europe. It's even fancy now to have solar panels on your roof, because then you think about the future and you think about your children. So I think this still has to happen here. And what I want to say about that, so in my country, your winter is my summer. So there is like so much sun here. There is an abundance of sun. We have a payback time of 6-7 years in Belgium if you invest in solar rooftops. So here the payback time will be much, much quicker. So I really believe if there is an awareness campaign on solar rooftops for here residential houses, this will work because you have a natural abundance of sun.
Sure.
So that was my first point. And then about the microgrids. Here around Telangana state, you have Eravali and Banjarpali and Ibrahimpur that are already solar villages, so they are subsidized by the CM. So every house has their 1 kilowatt peak solar on their roof, and there you can say, okay, maybe it could be more effective if you go to a microgrid, but then the engineering of a microgrid has a cost and this and that, and then there I think you can also say having all those people having their 1 kilowatt peak on their roof makes them aware of what solar is. And I think this is also building awareness, and then the next step can be the optimizing to a microgrid. So I really believe that here the potential for solar in India is huge. You have the support of Prime Minister Modi, and the point of building awareness that is really something that has to happen, and then you, in no time, you will go ahead of Europe. So I think really the future is bright in India.
Leading to, if I can put a question to you regarding that. From your perspective, each of your perspective, what is one ecosystem stakeholder that should be on the table, or a process or a policy that should come into that would actually change that we go far ahead? We have what you call the technologies. we have the abundance fuel, that's the solar or any other sustainable basis, but we have not reached the scale that we would have crossed while Germany, Belgium, everything else. What is that one missing piece that each one of you would say should bring in that India crosses Europe?
I think a recognition that distributed renewable energy has a role to play in achieving universal energy access. Because why do I say that? I say that not to present distributed technologies as an alternative to the grid, but because that if we do acknowledge it, we would talk about it in all advertising campaigns, all well-meaning campaigns from whoever, including Saubhagya scheme, which today is decidedly silent about how will that problem be solved. But if it could say that today you have several options, you can go for a government grid connection, you can go for a individual solar home system, or you could do that, or you could do that. If the whole awareness building could be more comprehensive around making people make their own choices, or letting people make their own choices, I think that'll change the game.
Well, countries like Belgium and the UK and the US, first, their sizes of their homes are different. We're talking of microgrids here of people who don't have access to power at all. And we're trying to say, can you please put solar panels on your roof? And can you put this battery? And can you have all of this so that you can run your washing machine? I don't think we even need to do that. I believe that the solution should be to create a microgrid for that location, and then it should be whoever is the utility or who is the entrepreneur, who is the company setting up to provide power to these people. I don't think that social policy should be that every individual villager or small hut should have a solar panel on their roof. I think that there is a big difference in the person who does not have, or the household who does not have power in India versus a very different category of customer that is being compared to. And I think that the problems that need to be solved are what I said. If we as a company are going and finding these 2,000 people in this remote area, and we are setting up a grid for them, we will set up panels. There's plenty of land. You set up, and you can actually work with the local community, you can work with the local village authority and say that for these 100 homes, we're going to provide power, and it will power all your basic needs. You got a washing machine, you got a TV, you got a fridge, you got all of those things, and you need to pay for it in a particular way. The question I was saying, or the issue that I was saying, maybe I can explain it more, is that when the new grid comes in, what does this local grid do? Maybe I didn't explain before. It's not that if somebody puts it on a house and a grid, yeah, both of them exist. How do we replace this as an investor? If we are putting billions of dollars into saying that all of them, and we identify 2,000 different locations, we put these up. What is the fate of the investment in these things? In the individual homes in rural locations, to expect them to put solar panels on their roof and power their own needs, and to ensure that they have the capital required for that. I think it's too much burden on an individual household to say you have to generate your own power, you have to create all of these things. I mean, these I don't think are viable from an Indian rural environment perspective.
I think the first and significant difference, I think, is the lifestyle and the different, like India is a much larger and more diverse society, and we talk a lot about washing machine, but I mean in rural area, people, even in cities, not everybody has washing machine. I mean, if you're thinking about a poor family in rural, like a village, they don't have washing machine maybe in the whole village, you know. So that one lamp is all they need. And again, going back to the city, we didn't have washing machine. We had a lady who would like wash the clothes with the hand. So I think. Again, access to internet, we talk about awareness among the people, like there are many rural areas, like how we create that awareness. I think the way that we should send the message or like design that message to create that awareness are all different from like a country like in Belgium. So I think there are many differences, just the different society, different lifestyle. India is a very big country that from village to village, from neighborhood to neighborhood, the lifestyle of the people could change. So I think that we cannot really compare these two.
No, but I'll come back to you, ma'am. And just to what she said, I mean, let's if you replace washing machine with sewing machines, the loads are same. Sewing machine. You can have lathe making machines. You have carpentry. You have all income generating activities, right? So in Belgium, it could be from a luxury perspective what you look at. But in India, the problem is today nobody is actually working on the efficiency. Today, when I design solar for sewing machine, everybody says solar is expensive. Nobody says the sewing machine is inefficient. Right. So today we need to work on the efficiency of lathe making, and that's if somebody is an investor or an entrepreneur, efficient livelihood appliances is a huge opportunity in this country. And
near cities, not even very remote and hard to access villages.
right.
The homes are designed very simple.
Sure.
So even one lamp could create opportunities
Sure.
for education.
Sure.
But I don't see any solar, I don't see any like washing machine. So I think that one lamp to begin with, it's very important.
Sure.
And then we could of course increase the
Base.
like yes, if the family could afford to have a sewing machine or so I think it's very different layers.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Come on.
I'm Jessica Obed, the energy engineer. I'm interested in knowing the perception of the people and their actual needs, like in India. Because like policies often have great, I would say, incentives, but they do not account for the needs of the people. And I'm asking because like a few years ago, Greenpeace established this mini-grid in a city in India, which I do not recall the name. But after that, they did a survey and found that people were so not satisfied with that mini-grid, it was solar, because it only provided them with a few lamps. And so many people, even though they do not live, they live without access to energy, would find it a bit offending to only have like access to one light bulb or 2, 3 light bulbs. And I quote one of the people who received part of that, and he said like we wanted real electricity, as if solar is not like real electricity because it cannot power everything. And although I do not know the details of the plan, I just know like it was $2.5 billion. I read the headline a few weeks ago. But I'm wondering if it's also like just access to a few light bulbs and if the people will actually be satisfied with that.
You want to go? Yeah.
I think that in a country like India that is growing so rapidly, we can't design our systems based on the needs of 50 years ago, that you have one light bulb that is sufficient. I mean, everybody is aware of what their aspirations are, what they would like to do. And there are, I mean, incomes are growing. If you see that in the last 10 or 20 years, of course, there are many poor people, but there are many people who are moving out of poverty, and I see no reason why we should build a system for the future where we are not designing for their actual needs, what they're going to have in the next 5 or 10 years, not what they had or what they would have been satisfied with 10 years ago. So when we are sizing a particular location or a particular set of people, we are saying that what is their per capita consumption of power now, and what is it expected to be in the next 5 years, and you have to, we try to design for that, not just. I think so. I believe that, I mean, you start with some basic saying, look, we provided electricity, but that, as you said, I mean, as he said, I mean, you get 1 hour or 2 hours or whatever, you can check a box saying that you provided power to that place, but it is not satisfying the true need of those people there. I mean, earlier we started with the basic feature phone. Today we're talking of 500 million smartphones. So there is, I mean, they don't say, look, I already have a telephone, I have a mobile network, I'm not interested in spending that additional capital. They will, they are willing. I mean, it's not that they're not aware, they recognize how much a difference it makes. So I think that, I mean, as you were saying also, about the distribution networks, etc., not when we say that there's a surplus of power. The old model was that you have these huge thermal stations or gas stations one way, and you have these massive transmission lines going everywhere. But those were designed in a different period. So today when we are designing, if you're saying that this is the local community there, or this is the local set of places, I mean, you're also taking out some of the cost of that transmission. You have to account for the fact that you don't need to build huge transmission lines and other things. And also on the other side, if you see the cost of batteries are falling so rapidly. So of storage. So where solar panels were about 6 or 7 years ago, it has fallen by almost 95% the cost of the panel. And we expect the same to happen in storage too. So if we are designing, like for example, we participated in a bid for trying to build a system in the Andamans. And there is really, I mean, we are replacing diesel power, like 20 rupees a unit. But you design it for saying that these are people, their incomes are going to grow over the next 5 years or 10 years.
See, one thing, knowing the Greenpeace, unfortunately, the case study written on that is absolutely wrong. Absolutely. The way it was done was completely for a different perspective, and the reasoning was very different. And the mistake was they called the minister, local minister, to inaugurate, who was the minister. And as soon as he inaugurated, he bypassed all the unelectrified villages and made sure that this village got the electricity. Right? Killed the project in many ways. And so that project was a very, and also to your saying, sir, in a country like India, coming back to, if you divide the poor into 3 categories, poor, very poor, and abject poverty, actually more expensive solar systems, sewing machine, makes sense for abject poor. You finance for the future cash flows, not for the existence. Like you have a 20,000 rupee sewing machine for a solar powered beggar, and you create the market linkages for them to actually link it to the markets they can actually afford. And that's where the beauty of having models in this country that can then be replicated in Africa is that you can bring in sustainable energy to the very poor and abject poverty before even light can come in. So livelihood opportunities for the abject poverty, which makes more priority, financing is created, and that is where the whole potential of this for solar actually makes sense. Even for the bottom, like you can actually create economic sense for people who earn less than 20 cents a day with solar, provided financing is created. That's something that, and that's where the government should put in risk capital, saying that we're going to put $100 million in the central bank. Even if 40% fails, the rest of the economics, it's equivalent to what rural electrification of America subsidized. You put subsidy in the financing of the poor. That's what the allocation could be. Yes, who was, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Lifestyle in India or third world countries. I developed a solar charger for charging cell phones and mobile devices and USB. That's a universal, like low energy, way of charging things, like not only cell phones to give the community way of communication and immersive communication to the world, but also some little lamps and so little things that would change the lifestyle of the people that don't have so many needs of energy, like sewing machines or washing machines or things so big, and maybe they actually don't have energy right now. But a little lamp with a little charger would change their lives with a little low cost, and it also allows companies to give social responsibility plans, because it lets you have a logo on it, and it's adaptable. You can carry it. You can carry it like a band or a backpack. So it's very easy to use. It has an internal battery. So now I'm manufacturing in Argentina. I have the patent in 122 countries, the PCT, and looking for patenting in local countries. And I talked the idea to manufacture it here in India, because it's a textile product. For a strategic distribution for Europe, Australia, and the internal market. So I developed exclusively for what you are saying now, and in the low cost and
absolutely. Congratulations, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So you had a question, and then the last question. Yes. One more. One more, and then.
Kevin Devenish from Barbados.
Yes.
I am working on projects where we are trying to install small-scale solar farms, 100 kilowatts to 500 kilowatts. And I believe you mentioned that there are key barriers to financing that can be solved. And most of the problems which I end up on, one of the key barriers, I also do residential installations. If the project or the person that the bank is financing fails to, when we install on solar on persons' homes, one of the key barriers is that the banks always ask is how do they recoup the equipment in case the person defaults. And as you mentioned it, I wonder if you have an answer for that.
Sure. I'll take the other question and then I'll let answer. Sir.
My question was, but I think it's too late. We've been talking a lot about serving underserved communities or communities off the grid or very unreliable and rural communities. But the numbers are so huge, 175 gigawatt and 160 billion investment. If India wants to do this, India will need very large projects. Of course, decentralize is part of the solution, but if you don't do the big ones and work on your grids, you're not going to make these numbers, okay? Reliable electricity in an urban environment only on decentralized without investing in the grid itself. Investing in the grid itself is very expensive, and then this capacity is hugely expensive. So does the Indian government have an idea who will pay for it? Will they pick the consumer, or will the government front it and then make the consumer pay? Because otherwise the investment will not happen.
Thanks, sir. Yeah. So one sec. Can you get the answer for him first, and then and I'll let the second one, Sarah and Ravi, answer.
So I can answer your question. We have sort of solved that problem. We use IoT technology to attach to the solar panels that we install on rooftops, such that we can now monitor performance, usage, and can also enable and disable those panels remotely. So if you do that, then you can actually turn off that household's complete access to electricity if the customer or the household goes errant. So there are ways in which you can solve these problems. Again, I think you have to apply yourself and think creatively.
On your question, I actually believe that while capital is an issue, but I don't think it is as big an issue as it seems. If you take this year alone, we're talking of almost 15 gigawatts coming up, which is almost $20 billion in 1 year. And if companies with good credit ratings are able to raise this, I mean, we ourselves raised over 2 billion in the last 3 or 4 years. So, and there are huge investments coming into this sector because it's commercially viable. I think the challenge would be if there are lots of subsidies or if you have to rely on the state. And I think that, I mean, we are competing with thermal, and we're bringing. It's one of the largest investment opportunities, actually. In fact, I would turn it around and $100 billion investment going in the next 5 years.
Thanks, Sarah. I think the potential is not only in infrastructure, but also if you break it down for the poor in many ways, and if you break further to the poor in terms of livelihoods opportunities, appliances. We have not even touched the appliances in any part of the developing world, whether it's a rice mill or a silk weaving machine, or many of these appliances have huge opportunity.